Title: Why the RAF Built Cardboard Airports in the Desert and Tricked Italy's Air Force August 1940. Western Desert, North Africa. The Western Desert was a place of endless sand and blinding sun, a world reduced to ochre and dust. For the British 8th Army, it was a battle of extreme attrition, a war fought over supply lines and small dusty outposts. But the war wasn't just on the ground, it was fought fiercely and relentlessly in the air. The Royal Air Force, RAF, was dangerously stretched. Their primary enemy wasn't yet Rommel's formidable Afrika Korps, but the Italian Regia Aeronautica, the Italian Royal Air Force. The Italians, operating from established sophisticated bases in Libya, possessed a numerical advantage and often better aircraft, such as the efficient Savoia Marchetti bombers. They were constantly hunting for RAF airfields, knowing that destroying the British capacity for air reconnaissance and air cover would instantly collapse the entire defensive line in Egypt. Wing Commander Alistair Finch, our composite engineering hero, now specialising in deception and logistics, stared across the vast, featureless expanse of the Libyan-Egyptian border. He was not a pilot, he was a logistics wizard, tasked with the impossible, making his pitifully few squadrons of obsolescent Hurricane fighters and light bombers seem like a massive, unstoppable force. "They're watching us, Alistair," remarked Squadron Leader David Jenkins, a hardened reconnaissance pilot. "Every morning, every afternoon, their Caproni aircraft are up there, taking photos. They know exactly where our airfields are. They know how many Hurricanes we have." Finch knew the truth was grim. The RAF had only a handful of operational squadrons in North Africa. Losing even one airfield would be a disaster. The current British strategy was a transparent failure. They would land, fly missions, and then hastily disguise their aircraft with camouflage netting, hoping the Italian cameras wouldn't notice. But the heat, the constant movement, and the telltale tracks on the runway gave them away every time. The Italian strategy was brutally effective. Bomb the known airfields, force the British to retreat further into Egypt, and choke off their supply lines. The RAF was losing the air war, not through dogfights, but through attrition on the ground. Finch stood at his command post, a battered tent near the only operational runway. He watched a reconnaissance Hurricane return, its landing gear kicking up a massive plume of telltale dust. "We can't hide, David," Finch muttered. "The desert gives up its secrets too easily. You can't disguise a runway. You can't disguise the oil stains. You can't disguise the constant traffic." He realised that the conventional approach, trying to hide the real airfields, was hopeless. They needed a strategic shift. They needed a plan so outlandish, so counterintuitive, that the enemy's own logic would betray them. Finch walked out into the desert, kicking at the endless fine sand. He looked at a discarded wooden crate used for shipping ammunition. An idea, brilliant and absurd, began to form. If they couldn't hide their weakness, they had to multiply their weakness. "David," Finch said, rushing back to the tent, "how good is the Italian high-altitude photography?" "Sharp enough to count rivets, Alistair. They're excellent." "Good," Finch said, a rare cold smile spreading across his face. "Then we won't try to hide our airfields. We'll give them more airfields to worry about. We'll give them airfields that don't exist." The stupid idea was born. Operation Aintree. The plan was simple, audacious, and bordered on the farcical. The RAF would not only camouflage their real airfields with more diligence, they would construct dozens of fake airfields, complete with runways, hangars, and, most importantly, aircraft. But these aircraft wouldn't be metal and engine. They would be cardboard and canvas. Finch, the logistician, began working with theatrical designers, set builders, and prop masters who had been evacuated from London's West End theatres. His new army was not composed of soldiers, but of carpenters, painters, and stagehands. Their new weapons were glue, paint, balsa wood, and cardboard. Their task was to build a full, convincing phantom air force, an air force that, from 15,000 feet, would look absolutely real to the Italian cameras, but which could be built quickly, easily, and cheaply enough to be disposable. They were going to fight the war with an illusion. The first mock-up aircraft, a Hurricane fighter made entirely of wood frames and painted canvas, was positioned on the first designated ghost runway. It looked absurd up close. A sneeze would probably knock it over. But the Italian reconnaissance planes, flying high in the blue sky, would never get close. They would see only the long, inviting runways and the orderly lines of fighter aircraft. The ultimate goal, to deceive the Regia Aeronautica into wasting their limited and valuable bombs on worthless targets, while the real RAF prepared its counterstrike. September 1940, Desert Air Force Forward Command, North Africa. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the first Phantom airfield site. Wing Commander Alistair Finch watched as his team, a motley crew of artists, carpenters and camouflage experts, meticulously positioned their latest creation, a full-scale dummy Hurricane fighter, crafted from canvas, wood and rubber. Up close, it was clearly a prop. The painted roundels were slightly off, the engine was a wooden block and the pilot a straw dummy. But from 15,000 feet, the altitude at which Italian reconnaissance planes typically operated, it was remarkably convincing. "It needs to cast a shadow, Alistair," pointed out Sergeant Davies, a former set designer from Elstree Studios, adjusting a support strut. "That's what sells the illusion, a solid, three-dimensional shadow." Davies was right. The illusion of depth was critical. Finch's team experimented with painted shadows on the ground around the dummy aircraft, a technique they perfected over weeks. They added subtle tyre tracks leading to and from the aircraft using old truck tyres. They even simulated blast marks around the edges of their fake runways to suggest recent bombing, giving the Italian reconnaissance an evolving narrative to follow. This was the creation of the Phantom Squadron, an air force that existed only on film and in the minds of the Italian High Command. The fatal mistake the Italians would make was to trust their photographic intelligence too implicitly, without ever confirming their targets with low-level reconnaissance or ground patrols, which was too risky in British-held territory. The first objective was to draw Italian attention. On designated days, a single, real RAF Hurricane would make a brief, ostentatious landing at a Phantom airfield, then quickly take off and fly to a real, heavily camouflaged base miles away. This created the visual evidence needed: a working airfield, a real aircraft, and seemingly a growing British presence. The Italian reconnaissance planes flying high above dutifully photographed these new, seemingly active airfields. The pilots would return to base, presenting their commanders with photographic evidence of burgeoning RAF air power. "Another new British airfield spotted, General," an Italian reconnaissance pilot would report, proudly displaying his grainy aerial photographs. "Look, 5 fighters, 2 bombers, the British are building up their forces." General Aldo Rossi, a composite character representing an Italian Air Force commander, reviewing the photos, would see exactly what Finch wanted him to see: a significant, growing threat. The cardboard airports were working. Finch understood human psychology. Commanders, especially those under pressure, tended to see what they expected to see, or what confirmed their existing fears. The Italian High Command expected the British to build new airfields. The photographic evidence merely confirmed their preconceptions. The RAF, meanwhile, was carefully concealing its real airfields. Runways were painted with camouflage patterns that broke up their telltale linear shape. Aircraft were dispersed under nets, hidden in natural wadis, dry riverbeds, or parked under trees, their shadows meticulously broken up. Every trace of activity, tyre marks, footprints, oil stains, was rigorously cleaned up. The goal was dual: make the fake airfield seem more active and inviting, and the real airfield seem non-existent. The deception worked. Italian bomber formations, flying their well-practiced patterns, began to bomb the Phantom airfields. Ton after ton of precious Italian bombs, intended for vital RAF infrastructure and aircraft, rained down on empty desert, creating impressive, but ultimately harmless, craters around cardboard hurricanes and plywood hangars. Finch received reports of the first successful bombing of one of his fake sites. He saw photographs of craters precisely where his dummy aircraft had been. "They bit, David," Finch said, a triumphant grin on his face. "They bit hard." "Any damage, Alistair?" Sergeant Davies asked, feigning concern. Finch chuckled. "Only to the morale of the Italian Air Force, Sergeant, and perhaps a few splinters to a wooden Spitfire." The Phantom Squadron was not fighting with bullets and bombs, but with ingenuity and illusion. This fatal mistake by the Italian Air Force, blindly accepting photographic evidence without thorough verification, was costing them irreplaceable resources and time, while the real RAF squadrons, safely hidden, conserved their strength for the battles to come. The sand trap was set, and the Regia Aeronautica was flying straight into it. October 1940, Italian Air Force Command, Tripoli, Libya. General Aldo Rossi slammed his fist on the table, scattering reconnaissance photographs across the map. "Another successful bombing raid, gentlemen. Our Savoia Marchetti crews report significant damage to the new British airfield near Bir Hakeim, multiple direct hits on aircraft on the ground." His staff murmured their approval. The Regia Aeronautica was inflicting heavy damage on the British, or so they believed. The aerial photographs taken from high altitude after each raid showed convincing evidence: new craters, shattered wooden structures, and sometimes the splintered remains of what appeared to be British aircraft. This was the wasted bombs phase of Finch's deception. The Italian Air Force, confident in their photographic intelligence, was expending valuable bombs, fuel, and aircrew hours on targets that posed no threat whatsoever. This was a massive, fatal mistake, a self-inflicted wound disguised as a victory. Rossi's intelligence officers, however, occasionally raised concerns. "But General," one officer ventured, "we have not seen a corresponding drop in British air activity. In fact, their hurricanes seem as active as ever elsewhere." Rossi dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "They are regrouping. They are using hidden landing strips. Our precision bombing is forcing them to scatter, which is precisely the goal." He chose to believe the photographic evidence that confirmed his desired narrative, that his Air Force was successfully crippling the RAF. This psychological bias was a key element that Finch had exploited. It was easier to bomb a known, seemingly active target than to risk low-level reconnaissance over enemy lines to confirm its authenticity. Meanwhile, at RAF Forward Command, Wing Commander Alistair Finch reviewed the latest Italian intelligence reports gleaned from intercepted communications. He grinned. "They truly believe they're bombing us into oblivion, David. They're spending thousands of kilos of explosives on glorified firewood." The deception was now so successful that Finch's team had begun an elaborate shell game. They would build a new cardboard airport, allow the Italians to spot it and bomb it, then quickly move the dummy aircraft to a different, newly prepared site. They even had crews tasked with scattering fake debris and creating fresh blast marks at a bombed site to reinforce the illusion of destruction. "It's like playing chess with a giant invisible opponent, Alistair," Sergeant Davies said, proudly overseeing the construction of another dummy Hurricane. "They're moving their pieces, but we're moving the board." The financial and logistical cost to the Italians was immense. Each Savoia Marchetti bomber sortie consumed thousands of litres of aviation fuel, required extensive maintenance, and put valuable aircrew at risk. Each bomb dropped was a resource that could have been used against genuine military targets or Allied supply convoys. The RAF, on the other hand, was operating with remarkable efficiency. Their real airfields were carefully hidden, their aircraft conserved. Pilots were getting more rest, maintenance crews had time for thorough overhauls, and most critically, precious aircraft were not being destroyed on the ground. The impact was measurable. While Italian bombing claims skyrocketed, actual RAF aircraft losses on the ground plummeted. This disparity went largely unnoticed by the Italians, who were blinded by their own successes against phantom targets. The wasted bombs strategy had a profound psychological effect on both sides. For the RAF, it boosted morale. Their cleverness was outsmarting a numerically superior foe. For the Regia Aeronautica, it fostered a false sense of security and accomplishment, blinding them to the true strength and resilience of the British. This strategic misdirection allowed the RAF to conserve its strength, preparing for the upcoming ground offensives. The desert, once a canvas for Italian domination, had become a vast stage for British deception. Every bomb that fell harmlessly on a cardboard runway was a silent victory for Finch and his team, eroding the enemy's strength without a single shot being fired. The illusion was holding, and the Regia Aeronautica was unwittingly helping the British prepare for the battles to come. November 1940. Intelligence briefing, Cairo, Egypt. The true genius of Operation Aintree, Wing Commander Alistair Finch's cardboard airport deception, went beyond merely wasting Italian bombs. It began to actively shape the enemy's strategic perception, creating a phantom enemy, an RAF presence far larger and more widespread than reality. Finch presented his latest findings to a joint intelligence committee in Cairo. Maps showed dozens of red pins marking Italian bombing raids, overwhelmingly concentrated on his fake airfields. Green pins denoting the actual smaller RAF bases remained untouched. "Gentlemen," Finch stated, pointing to the map, "the Regia Aeronautica believes we have over 40 operational airfields in the Western Desert. In reality, we have 8. They are expending 80% of their bombing effort against phantom targets. This was the profound, fatal mistake the Italian High Command was making. By reacting to the proliferation of fake airfields, they were not just wasting resources, they were actively misallocating their intelligence and operational planning. They believed the British were far stronger and more dispersed than they actually were, forcing them to spread their reconnaissance and bombing efforts across a vast, empty canvas. General Aldo Rossi, in Tripoli, continued to receive a steady stream of reconnaissance photos showing new RAF airfields appearing in various locations. His analysts meticulously plotted them, trying to discern patterns, trying to predict the next British move. They saw a British build-up that simply wasn't there. "The British are expanding rapidly, General," his intelligence chief reported. "They are establishing forward airfields closer to our lines. We must increase our bombing sorties to counter this aggressive expansion." Rossi ordered more flights, more bombs, more risk. The stress on Italian aircrews and aircraft mounted, driven by a ghost. This was precisely what Finch intended. The phantom enemy was draining Italian resources and morale without ever engaging in combat. The deception extended to ground operations. Finch's team would occasionally create dummy vehicle parks or supply dumps near the fake airfields. These elaborate displays, again using cardboard and painted canvas, were designed to draw Italian ground reconnaissance and even light ground attacks, diverting their attention from real supply convoys and troop movements. "We even built a convincing fuel dump out of empty oil drums and tarpaulins near one of the sites," Sergeant Davies reported to Finch, stifling a laugh. "The Italians spent an entire afternoon bombing it. The only thing that got damaged was the desert sand." The impact on the upcoming ground offensive, Operation Compass, the first major Allied offensive in North Africa, was immense. General Richard O'Connor, commanding the Western Desert Force, relied heavily on Finch's deception to mask his own troop movements. "Alistair, your cardboard airfields are a godsend," O'Connor told Finch during a clandestine meeting. "The Italians are so focused on your dummy bases that they're ignoring my real supply columns. Their air reconnaissance is looking in all the wrong places." As O'Connor's ground forces, initially outnumbered, secretly prepared their massive flanking movement against Italian positions, the Regia Aeronautica remained focused on bombing the phantom targets. They believed they had a clear picture of the RAF's deployment, but it was a picture painted by Finch. The phantom enemy was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. It convinced the Italians that they were fighting a much larger, more elusive foe, forcing them to react to a fabricated reality. This misdirection directly contributed to the success of Operation Compass, allowing the British ground forces to achieve strategic surprise, while the Italian Air Force, caught in the web of illusion, continued to waste its strength against ghosts in the sand. The desert's empty expanse had become a weapon, wielded with brilliant deception. December 1940, Operation Compass commences Western Desert. The silence of the desert was shattered as Operation Compass, the first major Allied offensive in North Africa, roared to life. British and Commonwealth forces, vastly outmanoeuvred and outgunned on paper, launched a devastating surprise attack against the unsuspecting Italian 10th Army. The ground offensive was a stunning success. Tanks, artillery and infantry swept through Italian positions, capturing thousands of prisoners and vast quantities of equipment. Crucially, the RAF, despite its numerical inferiority, provided essential air cover and close air support, having conserved its strength thanks to Wing Commander Alistair Finch's brilliant deception. General Aldo Rossi in Tripoli watched his front lines crumble with disbelief. "But how, General?" his staff cried. "Our intelligence reported the British were weak. Our air force has been systematically destroying their airfields." The answer, chillingly for the Italians, lay in the desert. As British ground forces advanced, they overran numerous Italian-bombed sites. What they found was a scene of surreal absurdity: cratered runways stretching into the emptiness, shattered hangars made of splintered plywood, and everywhere the remains of cardboard Hurricanes and canvas Blenheims, meticulously crafted illusions now revealed for what they were: worthless junk. This was the grand reveal, the moment the devastating success of Operation Aintree became undeniable. The fatal mistake of the Italian Air Force, their implicit trust in unverified aerial reconnaissance, was laid bare for all to see. They had been utterly, profoundly tricked. British soldiers and war correspondents took photographs of themselves next to the dummy aircraft, laughing at the sheer audacity of the deception. These images quickly spread, becoming a symbol of Allied ingenuity and Italian gullibility. The psychological impact on the Regia Aeronautica was immense. Their pilots, who had proudly reported direct hits and destroyed enemy aircraft, suddenly realized they had been bombing empty desert. Morale plummeted. Commanders, who had based strategic decisions on false intelligence, faced humiliation. "We were fools," General Rossi reportedly raged, seeing the photographs of the fake airfields. "We wasted everything. Bombs, fuel, men. For nothing." The deception had not merely wasted Italian resources, it had fundamentally undermined their faith in their own intelligence. From that point on, every reconnaissance photograph, every bombing report, would be viewed with suspicion, creating crippling indecision and mistrust within their ranks. Meanwhile, the real RAF, having avoided the brunt of Italian bombing, was able to operate effectively, supporting the ground advance without the constant threat of ground attack on its precious aircraft. The genuine RAF bases, hidden under their meticulous camouflage, remained largely untouched. Wing Commander Finch, overseeing the advanced ground units, watched as the Italian 10th Army disintegrated. He saw the genuine, undamaged RAF Hurricanes flying overhead, providing crucial support. His cardboard airports had not fired a single shot, dropped a single bomb, or engaged in a single dogfight, yet they had contributed directly to a decisive victory. "The greatest battle, David," Finch remarked to Squadron Leader Jenkins, standing amidst the ruins of a newly revealed fake airfield, "was fought not in the air, but in their minds. We convinced them to fight ghosts." The grand reveal of Operation Aintree proved that in warfare, deception could be as powerful, if not more so, than brute force. The absurdity of fighting cardboard airplanes became a lasting testament to the strategic brilliance of the RAF's unsung heroes, the logisticians and artists who had turned the barren desert into a stage for the greatest aerial hoax of the early war. The Regia Aeronautica's fatal mistake was not just dropping bombs on the wrong targets, but believing in an enemy that existed only in their own intelligence reports. February 1941. Headquarters, Desert Air Force, Egypt. Following the stunning success of Operation Compass, Wing Commander Alistair Finch found himself a quiet hero within the RAF. His cardboard airports had played a crucial, if unconventional, role in the Allied victory, allowing the numerically inferior British forces to achieve strategic surprise. Finch, however, was no swaggering fighter pilot. He was an architect of illusion, a master of logistics, camouflage, and psychological warfare. His insights into Italian intelligence methods and, crucially, their psychological biases had allowed him to craft a deception that cost the enemy dearly without a single real engagement. "Alistair, your genius saved us countless aircraft and squadrons," Air Vice Marshal Arthur Tedder, the new air officer commanding RAF Middle East, told Finch. "The Regia Aeronautica was utterly bamboozled. Never before has an air force been so thoroughly defeated by plywood and canvas." Finch's report on Operation Aintree outlined the meticulous planning and execution, psychological exploitation, understanding that commanders tend to see what they expect to see, or what confirms existing intelligence. Environmental mastery, utilizing the vast, featureless desert as both a canvas for deception and a natural concealment for real assets. Resourcefulness, using readily available cheap materials, cardboard, canvas, wood, to create convincing disposable decoys. Operational security, rigorous concealment of real airfields and strict discipline regarding movement and waste. The fatal mistake of the Italian Air Force was their failure to verify. Their high-altitude reconnaissance was impressive, but without low-level flights, deemed too risky, or ground intelligence, they were entirely reliant on photographic interpretation. Finch's deception gave them perfectly plausible, but completely false, targets. The success of Operation Aintree led to its widespread adoption and refinement. Finch and his team were immediately tasked with expanding their deception efforts, not just for airfields, but for entire military formations. Dummy tanks, artillery, and even entire phantom armies would become standard practice for Allied forces throughout the war, a testament to the effectiveness of Finch's initial, groundbreaking work. March 1941. Captured Italian airbase, Benghazi, Libya. Finch walked through a captured Italian airbase, now littered with abandoned Savoia Marchetti bombers and stacks of unexploded bombs. He picked up an Italian aerial photograph of one of his cardboard airports, taken just weeks before. "Look at this, David," Finch said to Squadron Leader Jenkins, pointing to a detail on the photo. "They even marked probable fuel dump next to a stack of empty crates. They saw what they wanted to see," Jenkins chuckled. "And they paid for it, Alistair. They paid for it dearly." The sheer scale of wasted Italian resources was staggering. Estimates indicated that the Regia Aeronautica had dropped tens of thousands of bombs on empty desert, consuming hundreds of thousands of litres of fuel and stressing their aircraft and aircrews for no military gain. This self-inflicted attrition had severely weakened their ability to effectively oppose the actual Allied advance. The architect of illusion had proven that the most devastating blows were not always delivered by bombs and bullets, but by strategic misdirection and the exploitation of an enemy's preconceptions. The Italian Air Force, a formidable foe on paper, had been systematically disarmed by a clever, resourceful British team wielding nothing more than paint, wood, and ingenuity. Operation Aintree became a legendary tale within Allied intelligence circles. It showcased how brilliant camouflage and deception could turn a desperate situation into a decisive advantage. The legacy of the cardboard airports was that it fundamentally changed how the Allies viewed warfare, not just as a contest of strength, but as a battle of wits, where the enemy could be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and even defeated by an enemy that existed only in their mind. The RAF had not just protected its planes, it had protected its future. Post-war, 1950s onwards, the desert winds eventually reclaimed the remains of the cardboard airports, scattering the last splinters of plywood and faded canvas across the vast expanse. But the lessons learned from Wing Commander Alistair Finch's audacious deception in North Africa left an indelible imprint on military doctrine, intelligence gathering, and the art of strategic camouflage for decades to come. Operation Aintree became a celebrated case study, a testament to the power of ingenuity over overwhelming force. It underscored that in warfare, psychological manipulation and strategic misdirection could be as potent, if not more so, than conventional weaponry. Finch, having returned to a distinguished career in logistics and engineering, often lectured on the profound impact of what he called perception warfare. The goal wasn't just to hide, Finch would explain to students at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. The goal was to create a false reality so compelling that the enemy would act upon it, wasting their precious resources and revealing their strategic biases. We taught them to bomb ghosts. The fatal mistake of the Italian Air Force was a critical one for all military powers to learn from: over-reliance on single-source intelligence, trusting high-altitude reconnaissance photos without corroboration from low-level flights or ground agents. Confirmation, bias, interpreting intelligence through the lens of existing assumptions, e.g., the British must be building up. Underestimation of the enemy's ingenuity, failing to consider that the enemy might employ unconventional, absurd forms of deception. The success of Operation Aintree led directly to the formation of dedicated camouflage and deception units across Allied forces, most famously the Ghost Army, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, in Europe, which used similar tactics of inflatable tanks, dummy convoys, and fake radio traffic to mislead German forces during D-Day and subsequent campaigns. Finch's cardboard airports were the conceptual blueprint for these later, larger-scale deceptions. The legacy of the cardboard airports was profound. Shift in camouflage doctrine, from merely hiding assets to actively creating false targets and simulating enemy activity. Emphasis on intelligence verification, the importance of cross-referencing all intelligence streams and avoiding reliance on a single source. Psychological warfare, recognition of deception as a powerful tool to deplete enemy resources and undermine morale. The Italian Regia Aeronautica, despite its initial numerical superiority and seemingly effective bombing campaigns, was ultimately outwitted. Its pilots returned from missions with photos of destroyed British assets, contributing to a false narrative of success that crippled their own strategic planning. The cost in wasted bombs, fuel, and air crew hours was immense, directly contributing to their inability to effectively oppose Allied ground and air operations. The story of the RAF's cardboard airports is a testament to the brilliance of a handful of individuals who saw the desert not as an obstacle, but as a blank canvas for strategic genius. They proved that with creativity and understanding of the enemy's mind, a small force could outmaneuver a larger one, turning an apparent weakness into a decisive advantage. The absurd brilliance of Operation Aintree secured its place as one of the most clever and impactful deceptions of World War II. A silent victory fought not with bullets and bombs, but with canvas, plywood, and an unparalleled understanding of illusion. This brings us to a final thought-provoking question for our audience. In modern warfare, with advanced satellite imagery and electronic surveillance, what contemporary forms of absurd camouflage or deception do you think might still be effective, or are perhaps being used today, to trick a high-tech enemy? Share your insights and observations in the comments below. I read every single one.